There was a time when a Friday night didn't mean scrolling through a streaming menu. It meant loading the family into the station wagon, following a string of taillights down a two-lane road, and watching a hand-painted sign light up the darkness. Now showing. If you grew up anywhere near one of these places, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you didn't, stick around, because you're about to understand why an entire generation still gets misty-eyed at the sound of a crackly car speaker. The American drive-in theater wasn't just a place to catch a movie. For a few decades in the middle of the 20th century, it was a self-contained world, part carnival, part diner, part playground, part secret hideout for teenagers, all wrapped around a towering white screen standing alone in a field. At its peak in the late 1950s, there were more than 4,000 of these places scattered across the country, from the outskirts of small farm towns to the edges of sprawling suburbs. Today, only a few hundred remain, kept alive by devoted owners and nostalgic crowds who refuse to let the tradition die completely. And honestly, that's exactly why we're doing this video, because so much of what made the drive-in special was never really about the movie playing on the screen. It was about everything happening around it. So grab your popcorn, roll down an imaginary window, and let's take a trip back to the golden age of the American drive-in. Here are 10 pieces of that vanished world, the small rituals and quirks that made it unlike anything else in American entertainment.
The speaker pole. Picture yourself under a wide screen glowing beneath a sky full of summer stars, or clipping a boxy metal speaker onto your car window before the show. Long before FM radio let you tune your car stereo straight to the film soundtrack, drive-ins depended on bulky cast metal speaker boxes mounted on short posts spaced evenly across the gravel lot. Pulling into your spot meant cranking down the window and lifting one of these units off its post, then hanging it carefully on the edge of the glass. Companies like RCA churned out these devices, each with a basic volume dial and a cord looping back to the pole, thick enough that more than one distracted driver forgot to unhook it before pulling away, yanking the whole post clean out of the ground. The audio itself was thin and crackly, prone to hums and static whenever a passing truck rumbled by on a nearby highway. But that roughness was part of the appeal, a shared, imperfect soundtrack that somehow made the massive picture on the screen feel more intimate. During colder months, some theaters even offered little electric heaters that hooked onto the window beside the speaker, letting hardy patrons catch a late autumn double feature without freezing. By the 1970s and into the 1980s, in-car radio broadcasts made these wired boxes obsolete almost overnight, and theater owners simply stopped replacing broken units as they failed. The metal poles were left standing bare in empty fields long after the movie stopped, quiet monuments to a sound system nobody missed for its quality, but everybody remembers for its charm.
The Intermission Cartoon. Another unforgettable piece of the drive-in ritual was the cheerful countdown cartoon shown between films, a burst of color and music that many people who grew up in that era can still hum from memory decades later. The moment the first movie wrapped and the credits rolled, the screen would burst into color with dancing snack food characters urging viewers towards the concession stand before it was too late. The best known of these was the 1953 Let's All Go to the Lobby reel, starring a grinning hot dog, popcorn box, and candy bar breaking into song and dance, marching in formation like a tiny snack food parade. A big cartoon clock ticked down the 10 minutes left before the next film rolled, its hands sweeping steadily as an urgent narrator reminded everyone that the feature is about to begin, which sent a fresh wave of families scrambling out of their cars towards the concession building. Peppy jingles and hand-drawn ads for nearby shops, the local hardware store, a downtown diner, sometimes even the theater's own snack prices rounded out the segment, giving the whole reel the feel of a hometown variety show squeezed between features. Children who'd already seen the same reel a dozen times over a summer would recite the jingles along with the screen, word for word, much to the amusement of parents standing in the concession line. Nowadays, those charmingly crude concession cartoons stand as a reminder of an era when a night at the movies doubled as a neighborhood gathering, one small ritual repeated at drive-ins from coast to coast.
A night out with the whole family. Back in the 1950s and 60s, a drive-in outing was often the cheapest way for a family to spend an evening out, mostly because no babysitter was needed, a detail that mattered enormously to parents raising young children on a single income. Parents would slip their kids into pajamas before they'd even left the driveway, toss some pillows and a folded blanket in the back seat, and pile everyone into the family wagon well before dusk. The children would goof around in the car, munch on popcorn made at home in a big pot on the stove and packed into brown paper bags, and watch the first kid-friendly film before dozing off somewhere in the second act. By the time the second, edgier movie started rolling, often a war picture, a western, or something with a bit more suspense than the studios would put in front of children, the little ones were already fast asleep against a pile of pillows, leaving mom and dad to enjoy some peace up front, radio turned down low, engine ticking as it cooled in the night air. This ritual became woven into the fabric of American family life at the time, appearing in home movies and photo albums right alongside birthdays and holidays. It gave an entire generation the memory of waking up bewildered in their own driveway after the drive home, with no memory at all of how the second movie had ended.
Playgrounds beneath the screen. Unlike today's cinemas, old-school drive-ins aimed to be complete evening outings, not just a film screening squeezed into a couple of hours. Since showtimes couldn't begin until it was fully dark, families would show up well ahead of schedule, sometimes a full 2 hours early, to grab a good spot near the front and let the kids burn off energy before the film started. To occupy restless children during that stretch of waiting, many locations built full playgrounds right beneath the enormous screen, positioned so parents could keep an eye on their kids from the car while still chatting with the family parked next door. These setups typically included tall metal slides that scorched bare legs on a hot afternoon, seesaws worn smooth from years of use, spinning merry-go-round platforms, and long rows of chain swings that squeaked in rhythm as a dozen kids pumped their legs at once. Neighborhood children who might never otherwise cross paths would race around together as the light faded, forming quick friendships that lasted exactly one evening. Once the projector bulb flickered to light and the opening cartoon started rolling, an announcement would crackle over the lot's speaker poles, sending dozens of children sprinting back toward their families' cars in a chaotic, laughing stampede through the rows of parked vehicles. Worries about liability, along with shifting habits and rising insurance costs, eventually wiped these playgrounds out entirely by the 1980s, leaving nothing behind but bare dirt in front of the screen.
Sneaking in through the trunk. During the drive-in's peak, many venues charged by the person rather than by the carload, a pricing decision that unintentionally gave rise to one of the era's most beloved acts of teenage rebellion, smuggling friends in through the trunk. A driver would roll up to the ticket booth with practiced casualness, pay for the couple riding up front, while several buddies squeezed into the trunk of some enormous American sedan, curled up among spare tires and jumper cables, trying desperately not to laugh or sneeze. Once the car was parked safely toward the back of the lot and the lights dimmed for the opening cartoon, the trunk lid would spring open and the hidden riders would tumble out, blinking and stretching to catch the show from a folded lawn chair or the hood of the car. Owners knew the trick well. Some had run it themselves as teenagers a decade earlier, and sometimes sent staff wandering the rows with flashlights to catch offenders, tapping on trunks at random and demanding an extra ticket or two on the spot. Getting caught usually meant nothing worse than
bugs, coils, and the smell of summer. As magical as an open-air movie could feel, it also came with the very real downside of summer bugs, an unglamorous detail that rarely makes it into nostalgic retellings, but that anyone who actually attended a drive-in remembers vividly. Because windows stayed rolled down to make room for those heavy speaker boxes, mosquitoes and moths were an ever-present annoyance, drawn in by the glowing dashboard lights and the bright wash of the projector beam overhead. Moviegoers armed themselves with all kinds of repellents, turning the simple act of watching a film into something closer to a small camping expedition. The classic choice was the Pick mosquito coil, a green spiral of incense set on a little metal stand and lit just as the sun went down, left to smolder slowly on the dashboard or tucked into a hubcap on the ground beside the car door. It burned steadily through the entire film, its thin curl of smoke drifting out the window, leaving the car filled with a smoky, faintly medicinal scent forever tied in memory to drive-in nights. Without a coil handy, people leaned on thick layers of bug spray, the sharp chemical smell mixing with buttered popcorn and warm asphalt into one unmistakable aroma that longtime drive-in fans claim they can still recall on command. Citronella candles and screened window nets sold at the concession stand made occasional appearances too. It was, in its own small way, part of the price of admission, a minor discomfort nobody complained about too loudly, because it meant you were exactly where you wanted to be.
The building at the center of it all. Right in the middle of every drive-in lot sat a cinder block building that functioned as the operation's beating heart, visible from every row of parked cars, no matter how far back you'd parked. It held the projection room upstairs, where a single operator threaded reels of film through a heavy projector and kept a nervous eye on the picture quality, and the snack counter down below, staffed by a rotating crew of local teenagers earning their first paychecks. As darkness settled in, this structure lit up like a lighthouse amid the sea of parked vehicles, its windows glowing warm and yellow against the deep blue of a summer evening sky. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hot dogs turning slowly on a chrome grill, popcorn popping in a glass-walled machine, and soda fizzing out of a fountain nozzle into wax paper cups. Since the concession stand brought in most of a theater's actual profit, ticket prices alone barely covered the cost of renting films. Owners made sure it drew a crowd, often with long cafeteria-style counters lined with candy bars, novelty ice cream treats, and hand-lettered signs advertising the nightly specials. Walking back to your car through the dark rows of identical sedans and station wagons, trying to recall which row you'd parked in and which speaker pole belonged to your family, was practically its own little adventure, one that occasionally ended with an embarrassed apology to a stranger sitting in the wrong car.
Double, triple, and dusk till dawn marathons. At their height, drive-ins were known for delivering serious value for the price of a single ticket. Double, triple, or even all-night movie marathons that turned one admission into an entire evening's, or sometimes an entire night's worth of entertainment. A single ticket could buy you a whole evening's worth of programming, typically opening with a cartoon short, a newsreel, and a wholesome main feature suitable for the whole family. As the hours ticked by and younger children drifted off to sleep in the back seat, the lineup would shift toward B-movies, low-budget science fiction, and classic monster pictures, giant lizards stomping through model cities, mad scientists and crumbling castles, the kind of films that studios rarely bothered promoting heavily, but that packed drive-in lots regardless. These late-night showings pulled in teenagers and young adults eager for any reason to stay out until dawn, cramming as many friends as would fit into one car for a single ticket price. All-night marathons were especially common on holiday weekends, Memorial Day, the 4th of July, Labor Day, turning the lot into an impromptu overnight campout, complete with lawn chairs, coolers, and the occasional guitar passed between friends during a lull. Making it through an entire marathon meant battling drowsiness with endless cups of black coffee, wiping condensation off the inside of the windshield, and trading increasingly delirious commentary with whoever was still awake by the fourth film.
Car hops on roller skates. Car culture dominated American life in the 1950s, and speed, convenience, and a little showmanship mattered above nearly everything else in how businesses competed for customers. To cash in on that appetite, a handful of fancier drive-ins combined the movie experience with car hop service, essentially merging a drive-in diner with a theater and letting patrons enjoy both without ever leaving their parking spot. Craving a snack, but reluctant to give up a good spot near the front, all it took was flicking on your parking lights or flipping a small switch built into the speaker post, a signal that summoned a server out from the concession building. A car hop, occasionally gliding between rows of cars on roller skates to save time during a rush, would arrive at your window with a small pad to take the order, chatting for a moment about the movie or the weather before heading back inside. Minutes later, they'd return balancing a tray of burgers, fries, and thick milkshakes that hooked directly on to the lowered car door window, freeing up hands for the food while leaving just enough window space to keep the speaker in place. Families with young children especially loved the service, since it meant nobody had to wrangle a sleepy toddler out of the car mid-film just to grab dinner. Though this extra layer of service eventually disappeared as labor costs rose and theaters cut back on staff, it's still remembered fondly as a quintessential slice of mid-century Americana, a brief golden window when a family could watch a movie and get restaurant-quality service without ever unbuckling a seatbelt. The passion pit reputation. No look back at drive-in culture would be complete without acknowledging its reputation, whispered about by parents and openly reported by local newspapers as the go-to spot for teenage dates. By the late 1950s, worried parents and gossip columnists alike had nicknamed drive-ins passion pits, the label that stuck for decades and shaped how an entire generation of adults viewed the theaters, regardless of how many families actually attended for the wholesome double features and playgrounds. The seclusion of a private car, paired with the darkened lot and the general anonymity of hundreds of identical vehicles parked in rows, made the ideal setting for young couples wanting a little time away from prying eyes and curfews. Teens would deliberately park far in the back, away from the concession stand's glow and the wandering flashlights of theater staff, where the movie playing on the towering screen often took a distant second place to whatever was happening inside the car itself. Fogged-up windshields became such a familiar sight in those back rows that they turned into something of a running joke among theater employees who learned to give certain cars a wide berth during their rounds. All these decades later, the drive-in's dual reputation endures, remembered equally as a wholesome family destination and as the backdrop for countless first kisses, cementing its place not only as a venue for Hollywood classics, but as a lasting symbol of teenage romance in the American imagination.
And that's the drive-in, folks. 10 pieces of a world that mostly doesn't exist anymore, but somehow still lives rent-free in the memory of everyone who ever experienced it. From the crackle of that clip-on speaker to the fogged-up windshields in the back row, these weren't just quirks of an old-fashioned night out. They were the building blocks of an entire American ritual. Most of it is gone now. Casualties of rising land values, the convenience of home streaming, and a culture that no longer organizes its evenings around one shared screen. But a small, stubborn network of drive-ins has survived into the present day, kept open by owners who understand that what they're really selling isn't just a movie. It's an evening, a set of rituals, a kind of freedom your living room couch just can't replicate. If this video took you back, whether it was the mosquito coils, the trunk sneaking, or falling asleep in the back seat before the second feature even started, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite drive-in memory, or the theater near you growing up. I read every single one. And honestly, those stories are half the reason I make these videos. If you liked this trip down memory lane, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into the stuff that shaped American nostalgia. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next one.